You're listening to the Power of Three podcast, the Scottish Doctor Who podcast that goes across time and space without portfolio, as we look at every single corner of the Whoniverse, to use that ever-popular phrase, loved by Whovians and, indeed, Who influencers across the galaxy. I'm Kenny Smith. I'm a Who influencer, probably. I'm also joined by another Who influencer and a Whovian of note.
Yes, I'm a Whovian of such dignity that I've been blocked by Doctor Who magazine on X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. It's great to be back with my fellow Who influencer, the one and only Finished Zine himself, our Kenny Smith. So, yeah, we're here. It's a sad one today, folks. We had a bit of bad news the other day, of course. Another member of the Doctor Who family has left us.
Indeed. We were talking about Jean Marsh, who was 90. And
not bad. Not bad.
Sunday there, it was announced that her death. So, yeah, not a bad age to make. Did you know? I just realised she was 2 years younger than my dad. So
right. Okay.
My dad would have been. In fact, it's my dad's birthday as we record today.
Oh, right. I mean, that returns. My dad would have been 85 this year, so a little bit older. Yeah, Jean Marsh. I mean, it's obviously most well known to Doctor Who fans for playing Joanna in The Crusade, for Sara Kingdom in the Dalek Master Plan and several brilliant Big Finish stories, and of course coming back as Morgaine for Battlefield. And of course, as we all know, she was also John Pertwee's first wife. They married for a few years. Kenny, can you remember when you first became aware of Jean Marsh? What was the first thing you remember seeing her in?
Return to Oz. I knew you were going to ask me that, so I did a brain check earlier on, and yes, it was Return to Oz where she played the witch, and she was brilliant in that. I remember just thinking, she's so good. But I knew who she was. I knew that she'd been Sara Kingdom, as I'd got my Doctor Who 1983 Radio Times special, and that was the first time I'd seen her, and just thought, she's great. She's absolutely wonderful. And of course, she's been in so many other things that I've seen since over the years. Of course, seen all her Doctor Who episodes that exist. I have to clarify that exists. I haven't seen missing episodes. And Battlefield, she was in, of course, and co-created Upstairs, Downstairs, and in turn, therefore, gave us the Chimes of Midnight, partly, sort of. And also, I'm sure she was in an episode of The Twilight Zone that I remember seeing years and years and years ago. Yeah, she was great in that.
Yeah, she's in a very early episode of The Twilight Zone, which is fascinating because she's a very, quite a busy career, sort of on both sides of the Atlantic, as it were. I have to be honest and say the first thing that I'm consciously, properly aware of seeing her in, I think, was Battlefield.
Wow.
I haven't seen Return to Oz. And it was an interesting thing because when it came to Battlefield, I'd had my copy of Doctor Who: A Celebration for a few years, so I knew that she had played someone called Sara Kingdom. And I'm one of these people that is, the great debate, does Katarina count? Is Sara Kingdom a companion? I kind of fall down on the side that they don't really count because Doctor Who was a serial in those days, and Katarina was just in a few episodes, and Sara Kingdom just appeared in one story. And I remember seeing Jean at Panopticon in 1997, and when she was being interviewed, she asserted that she was not a companion. Because in her opinion, because she just appeared in that one story. And it was and you sort of wonder, like, whoever it was that made the rules about what was what in Doctor Who back in the day, you wonder who it was that decided she was a companion. Maybe she was intended to be, maybe the production team considered her so, which is why she was she's included in these lists. And obviously someone at Big Finish thinks that she is because, Sarah's appeared in some really, really good stuff there. There was some really, really interesting companion chronicles, which I believe are all very reasonably priced these days. Listeners, if you've never heard them, strongly recommend. Where she's if memory serves, reincarnated as a ghost in a house in Ely.
That's correct, yes. I re-listened to it this morning, actually, that very first one when I was out on my walk, and very, very good.
Home Truths.
Truths, that's the one. And then she was in The Drowned World and Guardian of the Solar System. And then there was a four-parter as well with Peter Purves.
she was in quite a few of the early adventures, which are sort of set during. They were one of my favourite Big Finish ranges. Actually, I'm really saddened that they don't do as many of them as they did. Sort of set during Master Plan. There's one called An Ordinary Life, which was one of the first BFs that I bought when I got started to get properly back into it. I remember listening to it when I painted my bedroom. That'd be back in 2015. And then there was a really good one called The Santarans.
That's brilliant. That's one that I was thinking of.
Yeah, they're both excellent. I mean, Peter and Jean just working absolute wonders, considering they last played these characters at that point, 50 years ago. It's one of these things. It's kind of tenuous. I always think it's a bit tenuous. Does she count? Does she not count? I think there's more people that think she does than doesn't. But Doctor Who's just a part of a massive career. I was quite stunned when they got her on stage at Monopticon. I think I might have some camcorder footage of it. I'm not sure. I need to have a look. And I know I have to look out for something else I've been promising for a long time. I have to look out. But no, it's very sad news because, she was certainly someone of stature. She had a brilliant career. And at the very least, she's somebody that was thought very fondly of by Doctor Who fans because of her association and then sort of renewed association with the programme.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely love, as you mentioned there, the Sontarans, which was that brilliant story. The very first, basically, it's introducing the Sontarans. It's the first time the Doctor's met them. Sarah and Stephen both have encountered them before and know of them, but the Doctor doesn't. And it's a lovely cover on it as well. And the script from Simon Guerrier, absolutely fantastic.
It was great fun, sort of trying to imagine it being made in Studio D.
Yes.
Or being made at Waterside Studios, whatever, Riverside Studios, I should say. It's always fun with these ones to just sort of imagine that maybe they had a little bit of location filming, so they were, able to do a little bit more. But no, listen, a strong recommend on anything that Simon Guerrier's done for a start for Big Finish, but strong recommend on the early adventures if you ever get a chance to check them out if you haven't done so already. I believe Sarah's also involved in a couple of short trips. I remember one that's at the Little Drummer Boy, something like that.
It's a good Christmas themed one.
Christmas one, which I've listened to seasonally quite a few times. That's a very, very moving story. So yeah, she's I think the canon of work that she's done with Big Finish, is quite impressive, and She certainly counts for that, I suppose.
Most definitely. Now, we've mentioned Simon there. He's actually taken time to have a quick chat with us to pay his own tribute to Jean, which he did earlier this week. So Simon, having had a wee look at the Big Finish output with Sara Kingdom, she's in 6 full stories, plus guesting in others, and you wrote 5 of those.
Well, yes, she was mine, wasn't she? What a privilege, what an honour, what a joy it was working with her. It was such a lovely time. It was really satisfying to work on. I mean, she was amazing. She was just amazing to be around, and really insightful, really funny, very shy, and I think the best thing is that I didn't go to the first recording. I didn't go to the recording of Home Truths because I was away. And that was recorded in September 2008 and came out in November, so pretty quickly. And a follow-up was commissioned pretty quickly. But what that meant was when I went to the recording of The Drowned World in, I think that was March 2009, and met her, both Jean and Niall McGregor, our other actor, knew that Home Truths had gone down very well. So there was a kind of buzz in the air when we got into studio anyway, because we knew that something had worked with that. And rather than being, a bit awkward when you meet everyone and it takes a bit of time to get to know people and, who's this dorky writer who stood in the corner, I was kind of embraced. So yeah, it was just a joy to be part of. What a happy time.
So it's a bit of a surprise when you were asked to resurrect the character of Sarah.
Well, to be honest, that wasn't what happened. So I met David Richardson for the first time to discuss something else completely. What became the Key to Time series, and he said, we're just chatting, and he was introducing himself, and he said he'd taken over the Companion Chronicles range, and would I be interested in pitching for that? No obligation, no guarantee of getting in or whatever. But he said, it's been running a while now, and we've got a format, which is that there are two stories going on at once in each release, one of which is a story featuring given companion from their time with the Doctor travelling in the TARDIS. But framed around that is where they are now, years after they left. And he said, and that gives you two stories going on at once, and you can kind of jump from one bit to the other and stuff. And it just gives it a bit of it gives it a bit of depth and stuff, but it also kind of gives it a unique thing that other Rangers weren't doing. And he said, and that would work for pretty much all the companions. It wouldn't work for Jean Marsh, which is a shame because we've worked with her, or I think she's expressed interest in doing, the idea has been floated that she might do a big finish, and she hasn't run off in terror. And I just said, because I'm contrary and annoying, you could use that format as long as the story you tell explains how Sara Kingdom can be telling the story. And David went, yeah, I'll have that then. So I then had to come up with how that would work. And I sent him an idea. Originally, I was thinking of a ghost story, a sort of Christmas ghost story. That was my kind of idea. I was kind of thinking about A Christmas Carol, and, not very original, really. Alan Barnes read that. I think it was an initial one-page outline and said, this is the idea is fine. It's just that we've done Christmas in the Chimes of Midnight by Rob Sherman, and that's quite good. And you're only going to get compared to that, and you're only going to get compared to that unfavorably. So why not make it a more sci-fi thing and lean into that kind of side of it? And once I'd got that, then I was, on a part of it. So I wrote a synopsis. We sent it off to the Terry Nation's estate because they own the character of Sara Kingdom, and they went, what on earth is this? Who is this character? What are you asking us to sign away the rights to? All, completely legitimate and understandable concerns for an agent, mostly involved in, yes, here's a whole ton of money for the Daleks. So it didn't look like it was going to happen, and David commissioned me for something else. I ended up writing a companion chronicle for Sophie Aldred's Ace instead. And then Hancock, the agent for Terry Nation, said, yes, do it. Fine. And they came to terms. So I wrote it as well, and then sort of delivered it. It was all fine, and then I was going on holiday, and they said, we're recording it and you can't come because you're away. So it was like, oh, okay, well, that's fine, and put it down to experience. And then it did really well, which I should say is down to Jean, because she was amazing, absolutely amazing. That is, you can see why she won an Emmy. Absolutely amazing.
Listening to her in the extras afterwards, she sounds like she's slightly bamboozled by it all, but she's definitely enjoyed doing it. And the more she does, she's absolutely, you can feel that she's understanding more of this world that's been created for her, and she's growing into it and getting to enjoy it.
Yes. So, I mean, Lisa Barman would be able to tell you about this, because Lisa directed her and talked to her about it. But we basically kind of went, look, it's a ghost story, but it's got kind of sci-fi trappings. It's an M.R. James kind of thing, and that's the idea. At one point, the suggestion was, so when you Companion Chronicles were two actors, and at one point the suggestion was that the other actor would be Mark Gatiss, who I now know but didn't know at the time, and they had been on stage together, I think, and had then done, I can't remember whether they'd done TV at that point, I can't remember, but the suggestion was that if I wrote the second part for Mark, that would make Jean more comfortable and stuff. So I was kind of thinking, what can I give Mark to do that would be interesting? So I thought, I'll give him a kind of vicar part, confessional part to play, because that's, I could see him doing that, but I'll make him a sci-fi version, and I'll make him an atheist, but he's basically a confessional vicar. That's that kind of thing. So he's kind of that sort of character, but a bit different. And and I think I talked to Lisa about that, and then she cast Niall McGregor, who was brilliant and was a really good contrast for Jean. Jean, I'm not sure, knew Niall's work when they started working together, but she knew people he'd worked with, so they kind of meshed in a really good way. And then we were all back in the same room, and it was great. It was just, people liked it, so it was great. But yes, in terms of her not getting things, she got the kind of emotion of it. That was the really key thing. And she got that it's all about loss and dealing with the long-term effects of grief and trauma. And that's what mattered, really. So yeah, play the feeling. I think we talked about that.
Yeah, it definitely comes across, because I think that with the stories you also did with Stephen and Oliver, you're very much at home in this sort of John Wilde's Donald Tosh era, where it's not a happy universe. It's bad things happen to good people.
Yes, I think in the process of writing the trilogy for Jean, I found my voice as a writer. I think that's where it all came together. I'd been freelance for 3 or 4 years, maybe longer, but it was working on that where I, in part because of the response, in part because of what she didn't give me notes, but she, in the studio, we talked about what works and what, where the strengths of this were. And that then fed into what I wrote for Peter subsequently, and for them both, which is that to make them real people. That was the thing that she said, it doesn't really matter, or she said, whatever's going on, the important thing is that they need to respond as relatable people, and we need to understand what they want, basically. All fairly basic stuff. But if you could kind of get that right in a spooky context and a sci-fi context, actually you can make turning her into a house is a silly idea. But if you play that straight and play the emotions of it straight, it kind of transcends that silliness, I think. And that was a real lesson for me in what you could do, and in what audio could do, and in what you could give an actor and to bring to life, which a real grounding in how to do this.
Yeah, and I think that as it went on, you got, of course, to do a 4-part companion chronicle with the Anachronauts, and then, of course, you got to write what proved to be Jean's final appearance as Sarah in The Sontarans, which I have been re-listening to this morning on my morning walk, and absolutely loving it. Is just so perfect.
Oh, well, yes, bless you. The Anachronauts was a replacement for something last minute. I had to write it pretty quickly. And I think that the great thing about the Anachronauts, that what really strikes me, what I'm really conscious of in the Anachronauts, is that I thought Lisa Bowerman was going to direct it. So I wrote a part for her to play, just to give me an extra voice in it, because I was always looking for ways to build the sound and build the feel of it. And she got a part in, I think, Coronation Street, and wasn't available. So Ken Bentley directed it and said, well, that female character is now going to have to be voiced by Jean. So on the morning of the first day in studio, he said to Jean, do you do any accents or things, impressions and anything like that, just so we know it's a different person from Sarah? And she said, I can do Greta Garbo. So, Natalie Lang is played in the style of Greta Garbo, which is a delight. Pleased me no end. She also, in Guardian of the Solar System, she has to play In all of them, she has to do a bit where she's the first Doctor. And in Guardian of the Solar System, Niall takes over the narration and he has to do the Doctor. And Niall is of that generation that didn't know Doctor Who. The only thing, in fact, when we were recording The Drowned World, he asked whether, because he was mates with Matt Smith, who had just been cast as Doctor Who, this is how long ago it was, Niall said, so this old guy in this is an older version of Matt's character. It's like, no, actually, this old guy is a younger version of Matt's character, which Gene took great delight in boggling him with. But Niall had to play Hartnell's Doctor and didn't know what that was. And Gene said, oh, he's Noel Coward. That's what his Doctor is. And she said, and Hartnell was of that generation that would have looked up to Noel Coward and whatever. And then she said, Noel Coward sacked him from a film, and Hartnell was late on In Which We Serve, I think, and had a sort of bit of a cough part in it, was late on set, and in front of everybody, Noel Coward bawled him out and fired him. And she said, I talked to him about that, and it haunted him, absolutely haunted him, because that was the guy you looked up to. And she said, and I find it really interesting that there's a bit of Noel Coward in the way he played the Doctor. It's like, amazing.
Incredible insight, incredible. So when you look back on it, you've got to be very proud that you did this amazing run of stories, and it gave us that little bit extra Sara Kingdom, which perhaps we never thought we would get.
I think two things about working on these. One was that Jean told me she wasn't a Doctor Who companion. She told me, whether it's true or not, but her perspective was that she had been told by John Wiles that she was not a Doctor Who girl. That was the phrase used. Because if she was, they would have paid her more. Now, paperwork shows that she was paid more than Adrian Hill for Katarina anyway, and so on. But that's what Jean remembered. But when we got to Anachronauts or Sontaran, she said, I've been doing so many of these, I must count now. So yes, we kind of canonised her. But also, it was just that thing of she deserved. I just felt that she was such a great character and such an amazing actress that I just thought she deserved more. So it meant I really had to raise my game and work quite hard to get that right. And everybody, David Richardson producing, Jack Rayner script editing, Lisa directing. They were very hardcore in notes and stuff to make sure this was as good as it possibly could be. We were all kind of in awe, I think, and that's it's all down to her. If these things work, it's because of G. Marsh.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon. Now, something we haven't mentioned yet, Dave, is of course when Jean returned to Doctor Who in 1989 with Battlefield, all the rumours abounded that it was going to be the Briggs' last story and he was going to get killed off, having, of course, been Brett Vion and killed by Jean Marsh back in the day. And that was such a very good bit of fan speculation, and JNT absolutely got us there, particularly when we thought the Brig was dead.
Yeah, Battlefield's a funny story. I remember the first time it went out, I really didn't like it very much. I found it a bit cringy, but when I watched it as part of my full, big, complete watch through the entire series, I'm waiting for Kenny to start doing that himself. I was really, really struck by how much I enjoyed it that time. I enjoyed it more than I'd ever done. Very lively, very kinetic, some really great performances. And, it's interesting because a couple of years previously we did Time in the Rani, which reunited Donald Thingy and Wanda Bentham, who'd both been in the Faceless ones. Donald Pickering, that's the one, yeah. Donald Pickering and Wanda Bentham had both been in the Faceless ones, and then a couple of years later there's Nick Courtney and Jean Marsh reunited after both appearing in Dalek Masterplan. So isn't that a couple of fun coincidences there in the casting? Yeah, they have a couple of good scenes together in Battlefield. I suppose I remember watching that stuff and sort of thinking, yeah, because I hadn't seen the extant episodes of Master Plan. I hadn't watched the loose canon reconstruction or read the novels at that point. So, I just sort of yet to form my own opinion based on the evidence of whether or not Sara Kingdom. But I was aware that there was an element of a sort of certain frisson to them, appearing together. And I don't imagine for a second that she was cast deliberately so that she could appear opposite Nicholas Courtney again after the Dalek master plan. But it's a nice coincidence when something like that happens. Just it gives it. If you want to get meta to it, it adds an extra sort of layer to the text. It gives a little bit of extra resonance to what you're actually watching, and it's like when you watch the probe videos from Bill Baggs in the 90s, and you see people like John Pertwee and Caroline John working together again, and you think, yeah, it's nice to see that level of continuity in life, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, because life is full of continuities and indeed discontinuities. Something we should mention about Sara Kingdom, first time I got to see her was when Daleks the Early Years came out.
Sure.
And I think I may have tried to watch a Wobble Vision copy of a previously recovered Masterplan episode, but struggled because it was so hard. But it was great to then, and then when you get the lovely cleaned up version in the Lost in Time set, which I remember getting from HMV Useful Bride, ordered by your good self back in the day. And she's so Emma in that. It's, with the cat suit, the hair's the same sort of length. She just has that sort of vibe to her. And The Avengers is my second favourite TV show of all time ever. And I love Emma Peel.
She's also, I suddenly remember that Jean's in a very good episode of UFO. But
yes.
For the life of me, I can't remember which one. Off the top of my head, bad research. I apologise, listeners. We should also talk about The Crusade, which is frankly one of the best Doctor Who stories ever made. When I did my big Doctor Who watch through, and obviously was able to watch episodes 1 and 3, but as far as episode 2 and 4, you just had to listen to the soundtrack CD, and it worked perfectly because the David Whittaker's script was so strong. That's one I really would like to see recovered. It's a very, very, very intelligent, very, very, very clever story, and Jean's brilliant, and everyone in it is brilliant. It's maybe because half of it's missing, and because it doesn't feature Daleks, it's a little overlooked, I think. And of course, it does feature my good pal Julian Glover as King Richard. I have had the privilege of chaperoning him at a convention for about 20 minutes 7 or 8 years ago, listeners. What a nice man, what a lovely fella. And he called to me at one point, and Julian Glover's called me by my name. I tell you, oof, that was a pinch me moment. But yeah, The Crusade is one I'd really like to see back. It's maybe not top of my list for ones I'd like to see back, but it is one I'd like to see over a few others.
Talking of The Crusade, if I had to pick a single episode of Doctor Who from the classic era that I could watch over and over again, I would pick every single time episode 3, The Wheel of Fortune. I love it. It's my favourite single episode of Doctor Who ever.
Oh, really?
It's brilliant.
Didn't know that.
I love it. I watch it till the cows come home. And there's that brilliant line in it where I think it's Safia is her name, and she says something like, "We live in hope that we will see them again one day," something like that. And it also applies to missing episodes as well, I think.
Yeah, that's a very nice line, actually. Yep, living in hope. Yeah, it works.
Yeah, but it's lovely. I mean, generally, I think Jean's contribution is great. I mean, that's what 3 years, episode 4 of Masterplan she first appeared, so that's 8 Masterplan, 4 of The Crusade, 4 of Battlefield, but 16 episodes. Hell of a contribution, and it's obviously very well remembered by us as fans because Morgaine is a great villain.
Yeah.
And brilliant.
Absolutely.
Of course, something that we had planned to do this summer around the time of Jean's birthday was to feature a chat with her at a convention that she did back in 2003, the Invasion Convention. And that's been supplied to us by our pal James Hadwen-Bennett. And James is going to give us a couple of quick memories about it.
I think Invasion 2003, which was one of the first conventions I went to, was a really good example of getting guests who had a lot to talk about, and not just Doctor Who. And I will freely admit that at the time I didn't know much about Jean Marsh. I knew her from Battlefield. We had the couple of episodes of Dalek Master Plan. There was, bits of Crusade. But she wasn't really someone who I knew anything about. Doctor Who magazine hadn't really interviewed her that much. She wasn't some big glitzy celebrity. She wasn't, everywhere on kind of like chat shows and quiz shows and stuff. And I just remember that she walked into the room, and when she walked in, it was just like, oh, this is going to be good. I don't know what it was. I don't like the word aura, but she just carried herself into the room, and it wasn't a kind of a big glitzy showbiz entrance kind of thing. She just kind of came in. She was interviewed by Jeremy Bentham, and she captivated the room. But she was just an amazing presence without being overbearing, overpowering. I don't know if humble is the right word. It's kind of very close to the way she came across. She was very honest about things. She was very open about kind of, the fact that kind of acting hadn't been, a big money spinner, but she wanted to be the actress and everything. And it was just this wonderful talk of someone who really understood how to get things across, how to tell people what things had been like, but without making it kind of big and dramatic, or without going, oh, it was terrible kind of thing. It was just this wonderful, honest, very, very underplayed. I think that was the thing is, you get this immense sense of intelligence, of confidence, of power, but it didn't overflow. It didn't dominate. She talked, and the information, her life story, was the powerful bit. It wasn't kind of like her performance of it. She just told the audience wonderful stories, and I left with a real kind of, this is a terrible shame. We don't have Sara Kingdom. Big Finish need to get this voice, because I think that's the other thing, this wonderful voice of hers, very, very soft-spoken, but still packed with everything you could want to listen to for an hour. And of course, eventually the Companion Chronicles came along, and we had the wonderful trilogy and everything. And when Sara Kingdom came back, one of the first things that happened was I had flashbacks to this talk, and it's just a wonderful, relaxing, easy-paced, but truly fascinating bits of kind of the story of what it was really like to be an actress in the 60s.
Thank you so much, James. Now, Dave, I never saw Jean at a convention, never got to interview her, never got to meet her, and at the time of recording, I haven't heard this yet. So when I'm doing the edit, it'll be my first time listen, so I'm really looking forward to this.
Cool. Well, my first listen will be when the episode's released. So I look forward to it too. Thank you to James for letting us use it.
Here we go. Let's travel back 22 years.
Well, for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jeremy Bentham. I've been with Doctor Who for more years than I think I care to remember. And very occasionally I get Dragoon to come in and do interviews. Having said that, this is one of the opportunities that I think I've been waiting years for, because our first guest today has got one of those CVs that if you try and start printing it out on your computer at home, make sure you've got enough ink in the cartridge, because it's a list that is absolutely to die for. Credits that have spanned so many decades of film, television and the theatre. There's no way we're going to be able to cover it all today, so we'll do the best we can with our first dearly honoured guest, Jean Marsh. I didn't even know where to start with the...
You didn't like all that about the decades?
One of the first things you did, and I actually sort of dug out and had a look at it last night, was the Twilight Zone, which is probably one of the most classically remembered pieces of television that was ever done.
It is,
I thought, how on earth did a very young English starlet suddenly get to appear in the Twilight Zone in America?
I wasn't a starlet. I was a proper actress. I was appearing on Broadway with John Gielgud in Much Ado About Nothing, and when it was over, I was offered some work in America, and I was offered the Twilight Zone. I'm not quite sure why, but I think I had very long hair, something to do with that. I played a robot who became sort of warmed up and became a woman. And then I was given to a man on another planet, to cheer him up. And he was very upset to be given a robot. But then, as he played chess with me, I got more and more human. And then he fell in love. And I don't know what happened, at night. But if he'd done what people normally do, yes, he would have got a short circuit. And then his sentence was commuted. He was taken off the planet. And well, he didn't want to leave me. They said, you can only take 40 pounds. And quite clearly, I weigh a bit more than 40 pounds. He said, well, don't be ridiculous. That's a suitcase. But Alicia is a human being. I must take her. I'm in love with her. And they said, no, we've only got 10 seconds. Get on the plane. He said, no, I can't leave Alicia. So somebody got out a gun and shot me. And when all these wires came out all over the place.
Now, if the text is to be believed, this episode was shot in Death Valley.
Yes.
Some incredible degree of heat that was beyond the point where human beings would be expected to work.
It was 100 in the shade, as they say, yes. But it was quite funny because the crew kept passing out. They lost them every single day. But I somehow was all right. I was all right until they shot me. And the sound of the gun did something to me, and my nose bled. It went whoosh, like that. And but they weren't allowed to keep it in. It was too frightening. But it was hugely exciting. But my address there was quite frightening. I remember getting up in the morning and my boyfriend said, what's the address of where you're staying? And I said, Furnace Creek Inn, Funeral Rain, Desolation Canyon, Death Valley. I'm not going.
Keep the calling card, did you?
I think I have got it somewhere, yes.
Did the crew actually rebelled on something like the third day and decided they're going to have to finish it back in a studio?
They did. They had to finish it back in the studio because we kept trying to make things all right. Like we'd pull our mattresses off the bed and put it round the pool and sleep outside. And somebody told me to leave a light on, and then all the scorpions and beasts and insects would go into one place. Well, I very stupidly left the light on in the bath, so I went to have a shower, and there's, a scorpion family there. It was terribly interesting. And when we arrived there, a policeman, a sheriff, said that they'd found somebody dead that morning. That morning, just from first. And I saw a water hole with a chalking on it saying, "Thank you, Mr. Waterman. You've saved our lives. Anytime you're in Idaho, come in for baked potato." And it's still like that now.
Do you think that's what people are working in America ever again? Sort of thinking
no, in fact, I started living there. It was so. America has got like the whole world there, so it's rather exciting. Right, I mean, I didn't live in Death Valley. I lived in New York, but
it's not very commute.
No, I just worked there.
What would you say was the main difference then between acting roles in the UK versus acting roles in America? It was the treatment of artists noticeably different as a whole metric of it?
Not really. In the theatre, I think English people should remember to speak more slowly because we tend to speak quite a lick, and that's different. But as far as the way you're treated on a set or anything, there's very little difference. Except the stars are treated better than, ordinary actors, and ordinary actors are treated better than extras. There's nothing.
It always seems to be this cliche these days that to get on America, you've got to play a villain or a villainess.
Well, as I play villains all the time anyway, I'm always playing witches. That's fine. That's fine by me. I think it's men, not women, really. All the Alan Rickmans and things, they twirl their moustaches. Although I think in Fatherland I played a villainess, but I was German, so they cast English actors as Nazis and Stalinists and things. Yeah.
But somebody, I think you remember Al Pacino or someone like that saying one time that the English speak better, but the Americans move better. Is that the...
I don't think there is a generalisation anymore. I think that there's many kinds of overacting. So there's the overacting of us maybe being a bit more declamatory, and then there's the overacting of Americans being kind of a bit laid back or natural. I mean, there's a lot of overacting in a very simple film called The Hours, and there's one actress who it's just the set. It's an American version of what we do. I don't think there's that much difference.
So when you were learning your craft, was it a case that you started naturally gravitating towards certain kind of roles because of your own style, your own appearance, or somewhere in a newspaper cutting it describes as a strikingly beautiful actress? I'm not sure what strikingly means, but it's...
I put anyway. Well, I don't know. I've been an actress all my life. I didn't go to RADA or anything. I went to a pretty awful dancing school, really. But I always knew that I wanted to be a proper actress, because there really wasn't anything else. You were either a singer or dancer, or you went on the stage. And when I wanted to be an actress, what I said was I want to go on the stage. So that was always what I had in mind. And then I did bits and pieces in films as a dancer. I mean, wonderful films. I was in a Powell Pressburger film. I can't remember what it was, the one that came after The Red Shoes. The Tales of Hoffman, and a lovely dancing film with Vera Ellen called Happy Go Lovely, and Where's Charlie? I was in dancing, and I used to make money from them, enough money so I could afford to go into rep. And so I learned my craft really half in films, trying to get the director to give me a close-up as a dancer, how you do that.
So how was your agent, I'd say, selling you? But I suppose that's what it is, really.
Well, in those days, my agent wasn't selling me, because my agent was my sort of dancing school. So it was sort of luck. It was fortune if something came my way. But I did go out, and I was seen in restaurants and things like this. Sometimes that happened. And one of my best things, there's so many things a chance, I was photographed with some girls, swimming costume, going, what, for something on a beach. And I wasn't really that type. And, but my photograph was printed in something, probably the Daily Scum, and somebody casting a very important play, the Yorkshire Playhouse, something like that, Huddersfield. It was a comedy, and the leading role was of a girl who changed into a cat, and he thought this photograph made me look like a cat. So he cast me, and it just really suited me, and it was a very nice comedy. So I stayed on there for the whole season, playing very, very good juvenile roles. So that was just out of the blue. It was nothing to do with an agent, just an absolute chance. One of my big breaks in New York, they were doing Somerset Maugham's The Morning Sixpence on television, and it was going to be recorded live, and it starred Laurence Olivier, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Hugh Cronin, Jessica Tanning, wonderful, wonderful people. And it was all cast, and Pierre Angely who was very beautiful and a wonderful actress, was going to play the Tahitian mistress of Lawrence Lillian. And I was out at Sardi's one night, and I had very, very long hair then, but didn't look Tahitian at all. My hair was chestnut, and I had very green eyes. You know how you get older, your eyes fade. And the casting woman saw me across the room and thought, I think she'd be better than Pierre actually. I went in to see the producer, David Suskin, very important man, and he said, "Oh, I'd much rather have you than Pierre Roche. I feel a bit guilty saying it now." And they paid her off, and I played this part just from being in a restaurant. And I was ludicrous. They had to build up my nose and dye my skin, and my hair kept reddening through. But so that was another, big chance.
So when did Douglas Camfield come into the picture then? Or someone the guy next in moving television?
I don't know what the Camfield is.
He directed the two Doctor Who's.
Oh, sorry. No wonder they ring the bells.
Maybe it wasn't Douglas.
Well, it wasn't Douglas Camfield who cast me. It was Verity Lambert. She cast me as my first role as the Princess of France. And it might have been because I speak a bit of French. I don't know. But she cast me. And then the next girl I played, Sara Kingdom. I think probably Douglas did cast me for that because he'd seen me as that Princess of France. Obviously, I'd done loads of work in between. There was a big gap. But so that was work, breeding work, because I always say every job you do is an audition. You never know what it's going to bring you. It could be one day's work, and it goes on paying off.
One of the extraordinary things about that set as well was that next day, every single newspaper in the whole of the UK, it seemed, was carrying 3/4 page feature articles, enormous big splash images.
It was the tight, brown, elasticated tweed catsuit that did it. Why one would wear something like that going into space, I don't know, but I think I looked a bit of a cutie pie.
Is that what they were looking for? Because the comparisons were obviously with Diana Rigg, who just sort of made the breakthrough in women's character roles on the other side, and then suddenly there you were being presented to the BBC. Was that daunting? Was it?
No, I'm dauntless. Usually if I get a job, I can see the reason why. It doesn't mean to say I don't think I'm going to be any good, but no, I wasn't daunted by that. I thought I'd have a lot of fun. I didn't have as much fun as I thought because they didn't like me having fun. You know the story. Well, you know the story about me leaving the set. Right. Well, let's see. I was in my catsuit and I had a belt on, and there's a little box on it. It was supposed to have a ray gun or something, and the director said, well, when I say action, he said, you step into the TARDIS and you switch it on, and then we go into action, we take off. And so I said action, I stepped into the TARDIS, I switched it on, and the switch came off in my hand. So then I started to laugh, and he said, well, don't hang around. I said, oh, right. What do you want me to do? He said, well, just put your hand in your ray gun pocket. I said, he said, and take out the small ray gun. I said, I haven't got a small ray gun. I've never been in with one of those. He said, well, pretend. He said, and hide it in your hand, and then sort of switch it on. I thought, right. I'd never used the pocket for a ray gun or anything, but I had forgotten that I'd got a tomato sandwich in there. So they said action. They said me to start. I tried to put my hand in this. And I took it out. It was sort of dirty and horrid. I started to laugh. And I laughed and laughed. And the director said, leave the set, go to your room. Go to your room and don't come back until you've pulled yourself together. I turned around and put my tail between my legs, and as I left, I said, that may be never. So I wasn't allowed to laugh as much as I would have liked.
Did they ever suggest to you that you perhaps like to do the series permanently rather than just do it?
Yes, they did say, would I be interested in staying on? But I said, no, really. This is, I like my freedom. It's wonderful to come in and do something like this. And now I finished and I go off, and do something else. I might go to New York, I might go to Huddersfield again. No, I really liked my freedom.
Did you think of doing Doctor Who as just doing children's television at the time, or were you perhaps aware that it was aimed at a different age group then?
I never think I'm working for children. I've just finished a television series for the BBC called The Ghost Hunter. And not for 1 second do I ever go to work and think this is for children, because it's condescending. When people talk to children and they go, how are these days? You shouldn't do that. I treat them like adults, and my work is exactly the same. I wouldn't do anything different. I just thought that Doctor Who was a television series. That's all. No, I never thought that it treated it like children. And some of the things that I've done anyway, the Ghost Hunter, parents watch it at 5 o'clock with their kids, and then videoed it and watched it in the evening. And Doctor Who has always been treated all over the world as a proper series. Look at all these. Most of these people are adults.
But do you find it for something like Doctor Who, there's a need to do different type of performance, or do you think to yourself, well, I'm just me, I just give Jean Marsh, I suppose, to Jean Marsh playing this?
I interpreted Sara Kingdom, I think. I think inevitably there's something of you that comes out in every part you play. It might be inadvertently, but there is something. But basically, I played Sara Kingdom. I can't totally remember it, but I think she by accident killed her brother.
Nicholas Courtney.
Was it Nicholas Courtney? And then she found out that he was a villain, or he wasn't a villain, and I was a villain, and I wasn't. But you don't even play villains, you don't sort of twirl your moustaches. You just play the role, that. You play it, and the audience will find out more about you if you do that.
I was thinking more from the point of view that when you've got someone like William Hartnell opposite, he's very dedicated, doesn't suffer fools gladly.
He suffered me gladly.
And then 2 episodes later, you've got Peter Butterworth, who probably one of the time England's premier.
He didn't play a doctor, though, did he?
No, he was. No. But he was in the series with you, playing the monk, the chap in the monk's habit. And I always think of Peter Butterworth as someone who looks as though he's always about to burst out into an uncontrollable fit of giggles.
Yes, but I've worked with a lot of those. I'm working with somebody like that, John Fortune, right now, and it's very funny, but my God, it's scary, and to giggle on camera. Well, I think if you take, you have lots of fun, and then when they say action, you take it very seriously, and you prepare at rehearsals, and you know your lines, and you really, you've got to treat it just like any part. You've got to treat it as seriously as playing Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing, whatever you do. It's condescending not to, I think.
Is it more difficult working in a electronic TV studio? So for instance, all the productions that you did where they were doing the film series, I'm thinking of the UFOs, the Avengers, the Saint episodes, which are all shot on film. Is it a different demands on you as a performer?
If you mean, was it easier working on tape? It was more frightening working on tape. Especially in Upstairs, Downstairs. Doing long scenes on tape is more frightening, because if you make a mistake, you're letting everybody down. To start all over again, and people have given wonderful performances suddenly have to start again. So it's more frightening, but it's much more exhilarating. It's much more theatrical. And it is, it's something new to do short takes on film, without a doubt. It's a different expertise, and difficult for you at first. But I always did films as well as theatre and as well as tape. So I think I was used to it.
Because you're having to jump around so much. This film is so sharp, disjointed, whereas the tape it tends to start at A and go
That's
through
wonderful. Yes, there's more logic to it. But as I'd always done it anyway, what you have to do with film is keep the whole picture in your mind and sort of remember where you are in the arc. So if you got to a point you're in tears and you can hardly speak, and then you suddenly go back to the beginning and you haven't received the bad news, you must remember where you are. You can't just expect the director or the continuity woman to do it. You must do it yourself. So you've got to keep an eye on yourself.
You mentioned upstairs, downstairs, which I suppose came along towards the end of the 60s. Was it a conscious decision to move away a little bit from just being an actor to being someone who had some influence over what was being presented? I know it sounds enormously grand, and I'm sure it wasn't nearly as intentional as that. Where did they...
Well, it was needs mastering. I wasn't working enough. I was very, very seriously broke. I think I'd got £7 in the bank. And I just put my elbow on my car and it had gone through the roof. So it was, quite serious. And I've been talking to Eileen Atkins about an idea. Should we do something together? Should we write a book together? Would we write a series together? We had a very flexible thought until the idea actually gelled. While we've been chatting about it, we both decided that we should create something that we knew something about. And we're both working class girls from very Cockney backgrounds. And so we said, well, let's write about servants, but let's keep it in this century, i.e. the last century, and let's make all the research something that you can do that's not going into history, that you can actually ask people who are alive. So I was working with her, thinking, we didn't write anything down, we just had these ideas. And then one day I heard that I hadn't got a part in something that I wanted. And a very good friend of mine had, who was very rich and very beautiful, not a terribly good actress. So obviously it's going to be nameless. And she called me and told me she'd got it, and I thought, you've hit rock bottom. So I called up a producer that I'd worked with a couple of years before in a very good television series called The Informer. And I said, I've got an idea for a television series. And he said, tell me, we're just going in to discuss television series, my company. And I said, no, I'm not going to tell you. I don't trust you. You're stealing. And he said, no. He said, I won't. I said, no, all right. So I told him the bare outline. And he said, don't expect to hear back straight away. But I'll give you a ring in a couple of weeks. But he called me back half an hour later and said, we don't want to talk about anything else. Can we meet you for lunch? And can you bring your outlines and everything? And I said, well, no, I'm not going to give you that quickly. I'd like to talk about the deal first. So we went out, and I remember what I had. I had scrambled eggs and smoked salmon and champagne, so I was in no fit state to put pen to paper that afternoon. But I discussed it with Eileen, and then we did a very quick, rough draft, and my agent secretary wrote it all down, and anyway, they bought it straight away. There was never any problem about it at all. So
was that the intimidating moment, thinking, oh my God, they've gone for it, we've got to do it?
Yes, it was extraordinary. And there was this sort of thing of this scrubber, and I'm just a sort of Cockney girl. And funny enough, I had always written very good letters, and I think I'd written a couple of articles. I don't know. Somehow there was that feeling that I could write. And so after that, I was commissioned to do things constantly, and then I didn't feel like a scrubber. I didn't feel like a working class girl. I started writing properly.
Did you always intend right from the beginning that you were going to be in it as well as?
Oh yes, I wouldn't have been able to do it without them paying Rose. I had it that I could choose my part. Yeah.
But you had everybody else. I mean, where did they all come from in terms of ideas in their head?
Actually, no, I just wrote down logical things, and then obviously our idea was extended and everything. But all the actors came in quite logical ways. There wasn't any surprise things like I'd had in my life. Gordon Jackson was cast by the casting director. People looked through Spotlight. People had worked, with Rachel Gurney or whatever. So everybody was cast in a normal way.
I suppose I was thinking more in terms of the actual characters themselves. I mean, you obviously knew the role that you wanted to play.
Yes.
You've got such a panoply of people both below stairs and then everyone else upstairs. They all logically fall out of certain groupings or certain interplays.
You can set up. If you're going to be downstairs in 1904, you know exactly what you're doing. You might have a housekeeper. You certainly would have a cook. You'd have a butler. You'd have an under butler. You'd have a boot boy. You would have a tweenie. That's the lowest of the low. You'd have a head house parlour maid. You'd have a parlour maid, and you'd have a lady's maid. That's the minimum of what you'd have. So that's all done, isn't it? And then you think, well, then what would be interesting to have a sort of really serious butler? Why not have Gordon Jackson using his own accent, Scott, and have a cosy-looking cook? So you have Angela Bagley. They almost create themselves.
And did you have that sort of total artistic control over how it was going to be set up? I tend to think television is such a melange of so many other people.
No, there were altogether, there was the producer and the script editor, who were both very posh, so that was a good side. And then there were 14 writers altogether. 14 different people wrote scripts, because altogether there were 68 episodes, all of an hour long, so you couldn't really have just one or two writers. And there was a big difference between who they like. There was a man who liked to write for downstairs, so he was always given us, and the script editor, being very posh, wrote upstairs. Things sort of shook out very well.
How involved were you in sort of the day-to-day?
Mainly in arguing, really. Yes, I was always fighting for more downstairs, because there was much more upstairs than there was downstairs. And I said, no, the whole thing is that Eileen and I created something that we were going to call below stairs. Now it's called upstairs, downstairs, which is wonderful. But can we have it upstairs, downstairs, not have it upstairs, downstairs? So I used to fight for that. But often when I thought I was wrong, I didn't want to have the episode of Lady Marjorie going down on the Titanic. I said, it's such a cliche. And then her lady's maid arrived back from the great disaster. She was still alive. And she arrived back in the rain, and she came into the kitchen, and I said, she looks as if she swum, from the breast. But it was one of the most popular episodes, so I was wrong.
Well, did the success of it surprise you? Because it still is huge in terms of its international following.
It was startling, because not only did I was so thrilled that it was sold, but I didn't know if there'd be another series. I was just thrilled that was done. And then when it was finished, they didn't show it for months and months and months. They didn't like it. It was just put on a shelf. And then they had a spot on Sunday night at 10:30, which is known as the Graveyard. And they said they were going to show 6. And John Freeman, who was at London Weekend at the time, said to me at the launching party for the whole season, he came up to me and very sweetly said, well, I don't care what anybody else says, I quite like it. But then it was the public that reacted without being told. Mostly we react, to what the press say, but never before or since has the public and the critics reacted so unanimously. Immediately, by word of mouth, people were watching it, and all the critics, from the Daily Mirror to the Financial Times, loved it. Right, it was quite eerie.
Was that the first time you'd ever started to get personal, and say fan mail? I suppose that's what it is. Did any of it colour where anything went? in the production thereafter?
No, not really. It was the first time I played a working class girl, which was odd. I used my old accent. And I got more fan mail, but I'd always had quite a lot of public reaction to anything I did. A Doctor Who later, but everything I'd done, I'd had reaction to. So proportionately, that wasn't surprising. The most surprising thing for me was that in an ensemble, I was picked out such a lot, and especially not playing the lead in any way, that I won the Emmy. It was startling, and that I was picked out, like in Time magazine did an article about me. So that was terribly surprising, because I thought everybody was good. So I to this day don't understand why I got more attention.
Did you find it intrusive at all, the fact that the press don't usually know where to stop in terms of how far they want to go in picking apart the bones of everyone's life?
Not so much then, because they were actually very good writers. There were critics and interviewers were very good writers. It's not like today when they're just repetitive and they ask everybody the same question, and then when all of a sudden so today, if you're interviewed by newspapers, and that goes everywhere, big and small, you have to rewrite their questions to give a different interview. But in those days, no, they asked you wonderful questions, and you could talk about your private life and say, well, of course, don't talk about it too much, and they didn't. And the odd thing is that these days I hardly ever do interviews because it is intrusive. And then it's so hard being protective. You're protecting other people as well as yourself. But these days I give more interviews to American newspapers and magazines because they are not so intrusive. They will actually write about the role. They'll write about lovely bits of your life, like I love walking or cooking and this, and they will make it interesting. But in English, interviewers get down to what they call the nitty-gritty immediately.
Did you find the reaction in America unusual? I think because they seem to have generally speaking, a slightly chocolate box view of the country and expect all the supposedly working class people to sound like Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke. And all of a sudden here comes a series that's saying it a little bit more like it is. And it was incredibly popular.
I think that's why they reacted well, because they suddenly saw a reality coming their way. Now, when I look back at it, there's not that much reality in it. It's not as real as I'd hoped it was. It was a bit chocolate boxy. But there was a certain kind of truthfulness, and it was the first time you saw downstairs working class people as real people. So they appreciated it in the same way that people did all over the world. The only country in the whole world that didn't take to it was France. And it was because they didn't watch television very much. So I was mortified because I love France and I like eating. And I thought, I'll get tables in restaurants. I shall be Rose. Je m'appelle Rose Burke. But,
Of course, from upstairs downstairs was the next thing to hit was the House of Eliot.
Yes.
According to the press reviews, £6 million to set the first series up, which is an incredible sum of money for
especially
television.
Upstairs, downstairs, I think cost £10,000 an episode, something like that. Something really small. But that was a long time after. And then the House of Eliot was expensive. The clothes, the cars cost more than the actors, I should think.
But to do that in the 90s, you always tend to think of 90s television that every penny is skimmed, everything is pruned down. For some series to hit, which had such a massive production budget, was that easy to fight for? Was it a long time in coming, or?
It was a long time in coming because we sold it without getting any money. They kept saying yes. Then they couldn't find a producer. It just didn't gel. And then suddenly, 3 years after we'd created it, it gelled. And by the time it gelled, I was already writing the novel. So that was quite interesting for me, because I didn't want to write the novel of the television series. So I took our characters only, because once writers get it, it broadens and broadens and broadens. And I thought, well, I won't really go with the series. I'll go with my own story. So that was quite odd. But it did take that from upstairs, downstairs happening instantaneously. That was strange. People think that Eileen and I are incredibly successful, but we've only had 2 series, I think, Tom. That's not incredibly successful, really. I mean, we're successful in our own lives. Eileen is a dame, and she's very successful in what she does, and my books sell well, and I work all the time. But as creators of television series, we've had 2 of the biggest hits, but we've had loads of stuff that's still sitting in the drawer.
Is that just because you just
Nobody
can't
wants
get
it.
access? Oh,
No, we can get access. I can see anybody I like, but I just don't want it.
Is that when writing sort of started coming on, novel writing, I should say, because that was a fairly recent departure for you, wasn't it? It was going into novels.
I started writing novels, I don't know, where are we not in the I since I started writing in the early 90s, late 80s, I can't remember. Well, I was commissioned by Macmillan. They said, would you like to write a novel? And I said, what, just like that? And he said, yeah, you can write whatever you like. So I wrote The House of Eliot really as a sort of practice, because the bones of it were already there. And then I wrote what I call my first novel, which is called Finders Keepers. And that's just been republished with my third novel called Iris as an omnibus by Macmillan. Han Macmillan. It's very reasonable.
How did you actually find the process of writing? Alan Bennett always says, he spends the first hour of the morning staring at the white sheet of paper. Was it the same for you, or did the words just happily...
It varies. What I find I have to do is work very hard, and you've got to treat it like a job. So I haven't got a computer or anything like that, or a typewriter. I've got a writing board and a magnet, and I put my paper up to the magnet, and I use a very, very fine nib. And I put, like, The House of Eliot by Jean Marsh. That's my favourite bit. And then I write and write and write, and about 8 months to a year later, I write the end. And that's my second favourite bit. So what I do is I fit it in, writing, to what I want to do anyway. So I get up quite early, and I write before breakfast. And then I have breakfast, and then I write again, another lump. And then I make a sandwich and go for a walk. I'm a terribly keen walker. And so that's my lunchtime walking done. And then I come back and I write again. Now, in the afternoon, I tend to write quite well. That's probably my optimum time. Because it's thinking time with my walking. I get ideas. And then I pause and I have dinner. And then I write again after dinner, and that usually has to be rewritten in the morning, because I go into I write in the kitchen, and I have my first glass of champagne. I drink champagne every night. One glass of, yes, but I've got a club that keeps it fresh for the week. I have one glass of champagne while I'm cooking and listening to either I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, and then the Archers. Always the Archers. Don't answer the telephone. It could be anybody in the world saying, I would speak to you right now, can you get on a plane to Los Angeles, you're going to star with Robert Redford. I still wouldn't answer the phone for the Archers. And then I eat dinner about 7:30, 8:15, and I drink three glasses of wine, and then I write again, and that often is tosh. And then, but there's some bones there, and I rewrite them all. But as long as I stick to that schedule, and I take it seriously, it's okay. But one of the most important things is that you're always given a third of the money first. And then you always spend it. And then you've always got guilt and responsibility hanging over you that if I don't write this book, I'm stealing that round of money.
Very clever stuff.
It is very, very clever, yeah.
But did your own writing style influence from any particular author or writer, or that you think, oh, I really like that, this is how I'm going to write? Or...
No, because I'm not influenced by anybody who writes today, because they don't very rarely use pretty words. I really like, I love the early 20s writing. If I'm influenced by anybody, it's a man called Maddox Ford, who is an exquisite writer, but it's all hidden. The beauty of his English is just, you're not aware of it. But as a writer, if I didn't read good writers like him, I don't think I would know how to write. I'd rather... he taught Conrad how to write, for instance. He's a great English writer. And Jane Austen will teach you how to write. And you can use the neat way of making sentences, but you do it in today's terms. But I would never be influenced by anybody who's writing today, because it's not how I think. I don't think in short, staccato sentences. I think in quite convoluted ways, and I use quite nice words. So it's not really conscious. If in any way I write like anybody, I don't know which is.
This enormous panoply of talents that you have. Do you find sometimes producers or people casting you for instance, you're doing Rory Bremner,
yeah,
which is like an most incredible turnabout. Do they ever feel intimidated about asking you to do something like Rory Bremner?
They're such nice people. The other day, I don't work with Rory, but Rory's around, when one's working, and it's so extraordinary. The three of them are such fantastic talent, and they've got long careers, and they're brilliant, all of them, and we all change in the same room. I mean, I have to say, shut your eyes, I'm going to take my knickers off or something. and then he gets a false ear or something put on while somebody's, back combing my hair, and an elbow will go in his face. They are so unstarry. But the other day, Rory said to me, "We can't believe you're doing this." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, we keep saying Jean's doing it." I said, "Oh, Rory, anybody would do this to work with you, to work with the two Johns." I'm thrilled when I drive to wherever we're working. We always work in ghastly, sort of false posh golf clubs, and high ceilings and big open fires that aren't open fires, all that slightly pretentious. Yeah, that sort of thing, and they're called Ye Old Log or something. There's no sign. There's no sign of an old log, and there's a shooting place. We were working in a shooting lodge the other day near High Wycombe, within earshot of the M40, and there was a gun for sale for £7,000. I thought, my goodness, criminals must be rich these days. I mean, I don't think criminals go there. It was for shooting plain pigeons or whatever. But I'm so happy when I drive to work and I do it. I love them, and I think it's hilarious, and I feel chuffed to be chosen.
I seem to remember one of you saying you've practically done everything apart from, say, ice skating and opera or something. Is there anything you'd actually...
I have done opera. All right. Well, I will tell you. No, I can't sing, but I've done opera. When I was in New York, Bernstein, can't remember his name. Leonard Bernstein was doing a programme on television about the arts once a week, and he decided to do a programme called What Makes Opera Grand, and he was going to do La Bohème with an acting company and a singing company. Great singers, like the Rodolfo was Carlo Bergonzi. And so he cast me as Mimi, and then he thought we would be rotten, the singers would be wonderful, and you could see what makes opera grand. Well, we rehearsed. I mean, we weren't going oh, your tiny hand is frozen. When I met Rudolph, I said, my name's Mimi, and I'm freezing. Would you mind me sausage? We didn't. And so we went to the very first time when we were going to be with the singers, and then the singer, my Mimi, stood up, and she was built like a brick shit. She was one of the greatest singers in the world, but so she stood there and she sang, and she did her bit, and all her entourage and everybody screamed and shouted, and I thought, oh, this is nice. So I got up and did my little bit, and I was terribly thin at the time, and did my bit of pathos. Nothing. I sat down, and our director said, I'll give you notes later. Well, why, what? How comes it? Well, we did it on stage at the Old Met. It was so exciting to be there. And then there was a party after back at Leonard Ranston's house, and he said, well, that's not what I had in mind. I would much rather watch you than, well, not me, the actors, than the opera, especially on television, of course. So I have done opera, but I haven't ice skated. No, I know I will not be ice skating.
But is there anything that you'd really like to do before deciding to hang up the boots for good?
Oh, as I never will decide. There's no point in retiring in this business, because all you can say, well, I won't do that job. I turned work down now, but there's no point in retiring. But I have never ever worked at the Royal Shakespeare or the National Theatre, and I would like one day, say, to work at the Royal Shakespeare and have a cottage near to the theatre, but in the countryside, and not play big roles, play little old ladies with no responsibility, and hang around in the back and steal the show. have one nice scene, and see those poor loves who've got to learn everything, and I'm just here.
Well, I'm afraid I almost feel guilty that I'm stealing the show here as far as questions are concerned. I'm suddenly aware that we've got masses of people, so at this stage I'd like to throw it open for anyone who would like to take this unique opportunity. Come on, who's going to be the first to put their hand up? Who feels brave? The gentleman towards the back.
Earlier you were talking about the differences between British and American actors. Now I just wondered, I've noticed that when I put the mute button on the television, I can usually tell whether I'm watching a British or American programme, because they're much more expressive, both in their hand gestures and their voices. Do you not find that?
Oh, it's a terribly interesting thing to do. I think that's part and parcel of what I said, is that they seem to have an interior life that we don't have, and that we express it on the outside, but their interior life is just as exaggerated in a way as our exterior is. But I'm going to go home and do that straight away. But I don't think everybody, I think us older character actors tend to use our hands a lot, and in a way I don't want to know what we do. It's like I don't want to know too much about myself. I don't want to know what people like about me.
Are you one of those people that watches your own performance?
Not a lot, not a whole heap. If I think I didn't pull it off and I've got something to learn, I'll force myself. But I do watch the Rory Bremner show now, because we make it up as we go along. That it isn't scripted.
Really?
So it's like flying by the seat of your pants. So don't know what's going on. Anybody else? Yes.
Is there going to be another series of Ghost Hunter, or would you work with two films?
There isn't going to be another series of The Ghost Hunter, for a very silly reason. It was the most successful BBC programme, more successful than Pokemon even, and they're not doing it anymore because there's a new producer who wants to do his own stuff. So I think it's terribly sad. But no, there isn't going to be, unless, the old producer comes back. Did you like it?
Yeah, I know.
Good. And what was the second part of your question?
The company that does the Doctor Who audio CDs.
Oh, I didn't
It's
know.
almost like radio, but it's translated onto a CD format. They're continuing the Doctor Who serials, but in that sort of medium.
Oh, tell me about it. Have you heard it?
Yeah, they kind of do these things with the past Doctor and sort of start it.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Well, yes, I would. There's not much I'd say no to, really. I mean, you can always do it once, and if you don't like it, don't do it again.
Gentlemen,
any memories of
Well, yes. I remember feeling, going onto the set, feeling, well, I look rather cute today. And then the last day, you're going to look cute. And then quite a few times, I had to go back and be aged and aged and aged. And I remember thinking, is this it? Is this what I'm going to look like? And how old am I now? And I remember looking at my mother and thinking, my mother doesn't look like that. But I was thrilled, finally, when the last thing was an older actress. Because I thought, I don't want to see myself any older than this. That's enough. So those are my, it's all vanity. It was fun to do, of course. Nice way to die. Quickly, age quickly.
I have sort of visions in my head of what rehearsals must be like when you're just in an old gymnasium. You're trying to make out in your head that you're age 390 and you're crawling along a sandpit and all you're doing is walking around on a... Well, it's very difficult.
Well, it's like anything. You have to adapt. I think much more difficult than that was when I was playing Morgaine Le Fay, and in rehearsals I was supposed to have a lovely floaty ball in which I saw what was happening somewhere else, and they gave me a lampshade, a triangle lampshade. Shaped like an upside down Poe, and so I rehearsed like that. And eventually I said, "Look, shouldn't I really have the real ball?" I called it Bally. Come and give me my Bally, so it'll be easier. I don't want to shock when I go on the set. Give me my Bally. And they said, "Well, we haven't quite designed it yet." So eventually we got on the set and we were going to do this scene. It was seconds away, and I said, "Ho ho, come on, give me Bally." And they came on the set and gave me the lampshade. I said, "You're kidding?" I said, "I thought it was sort of went out in the air." They said, "Well, you just..." I said, "I can't throw a glass lampshade up in the air." I said, "Well, I don't know if I would have done it if I'd known I was going to have a lamp instead of a Bally." Yeah. So that was much more difficult.
I think we have time for one more question if there's anyone there from just maybe at the back.
Yes.
Who do you admire in the acting profession today?
A lot of people, it depends really what you see them in. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, I admire Eileen Atkins tremendously, but that's partly because I see all her work, because she's, one of my best friends. But I think everybody who is successful, there's usually a reason. But it's like, Kevin Spacey's getting loads of attention. And he's not getting it because he's a film star, he's getting it because he's a very good actor. I can't think of individuals. I tend to like performances. Like the Talking Heads, I thought, Margaret Tyzacks was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And then sometimes you just like a funny little daft bit of comedy that somebody does. It was like I really admire the two Johns in the Rory Brennan show, very much indeed. So I've dried up, I can't think of anybody.
You said Robert Redford a while ago.
Oh no, I fancy Robert Redford. Definitely put together. Although I do think he's good, but no, that's totally different.
Have there been any of the big Hollywood actors or actresses that you decided it would be really nice to have done that role or to appear in that movie or I could have done that?
Oh, yeah, but I don't know about the Hollywood. I never saw myself as a film star. Actually, the person I admire very much is Miranda Richardson. She does seem to transform, and I've worked with her, and she's a very brave actress. You know, she will take huge risks. I suppose if you look at my type is the same as some of the greatest actors. So I'm the same type as Eileen, the same type as Maggie Smith. So I look at them and think, but I usually think, oh, you're so wonderful. Might have done it differently. But no.
So next stop, Harry Potter.
Well, I would like that, because I'm known for my witches. I played 9 witches, so I don't understand why I'm waiting so long to Potterize.
So everyone get writing on Monday. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for that. Fascinating. Always fascinating. I'm saying that with hindsight because obviously, or with foresight even because I've not heard it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I remember quite clearly that I think she was on stage with. Oh, crikey, I can't remember now. Optigan, was she on stage with Peter Purvis? No, I don't think she was. I can't remember if she was on her own. I would need to try and find the tape. But I remember the thing that always struck me is she was quite clear about. I wasn't a companion. No, and it was. You could see a few people going, and you sort of think there's that whole thing about the received wisdom that Doctor Who fans are, or at least us old school Doctor Who fans were often fed because we couldn't watch or see the episodes for ourselves. But no, Jean, a great contribution to Doctor Who in many ways. And just, our thoughts are with her friends and family.
Absolutely. A great contribution, not just Doctor Who, but to acting in general. Always somebody who gives a great performance. Played a brilliant witch constantly. And yeah, may she rest in peace. And thank you for everything you did, Jean.
Absolutely.
So I think it would be appropriate, Dave, if we were to play out with the theme tune from Upstairs, Downstairs, given that she created that. I thought that'd be a nice thing to do.
Yeah, that works. That'll do. Right, take it easy, folks. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon. All the best.
We'll be back next week with our scheduled episode. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.